And thank you and welcome to everyone that's joining today's webinar. As you can see, we're going to be navigating through an individual tax return in Desktop in our 1040 program. So if you're not familiar with preparing a return, I think this webinar is going to be really good for you. But just to recap, here's our agenda for today. We're going to provide an introduction to our CrossLink 1040 Desktop. We're going to focus on preparing the return, how to prepare a tax return using the program. And that includes all the way up to the end of that process of the tax return, the verification process, and the transmission of that tax return, how that process works. So with that said, we're really going to focus in the program right now. So let's just jump right into it. We're going to go into our new CrossLink 2023 software desktop program for tax year 2022. We have some tools here. This is, by the way, the work in progress summary. As soon as you log into the program, this is what you'll encounter. And we have a lot of tools here, a lot of options, as we can see. Now, on a previous webinar in December, I covered some of these tools that are important for tax preparation. If you're interested in taking, a deeper or more detailed look at this work in progress, I recommend taking a look at that video. It's on our YouTube channel right now, posted in December, with the same title, How to Prepare a Return in CrossLink 1040 Desktop. But I do want to point out at least a couple of options in here that are going to be very important with the new software. First of all, transmitting with the program. Desktop is a completely, it's an offline program as you're using it. It only gets online when you transmit, when you're e-filing returns or communicating with our central site. So let's do that now. You can transmit with the software by either clicking on the transmit button here on the toolbar or transmit to central site. Either way, if you click on any of these two options, it just opens up this window here, this transmission window. From here, I can see what exactly is going to be transmitted, but I could also click on this filter button to see if you had any returns that are waiting to be e-filed, that you've marked for transmission. The term we use is queue. You queued the return for transmission. If you did, you would see them here. In my case, I don't have any returns that are waiting to be e-filed. So I'm just going to click OK here. But I did want to point out that button because it may be useful to you. And then transmit. I'm going to transmit with the software, do a blank transmission, and you may encounter, you see what we're going through right now, these updates. You may see that with your new program as well, especially with the new program. You're going to be getting updates all the time. So I definitely recommend transmitting with the software, probably every time you use it at the beginning of the day, just to see if you have any updates pending, and then applying those updates. Here I can see that I have 10 updates pending. You can click on software updates and then apply all. In my case, in the case of time, I won't apply these updates. They may take a few moments. I don't want to waste it during this live webinar. But with that said, I did want to point it out though, so you can keep that in mind. But now let's focus on tax preparation, on getting a return prepared right here on the work in progress summary. The easiest way to do that is to click on Add New. This Add New button, it'll immediately prompt you for the taxpayer social. Now, if the taxpayer doesn't have a social, you can click on this W7 button, and a return will open with the social comprised of all nines instead of a regular number. In that case, when you click on this W7 button, you can apply for an ITIN for the taxpayer, and then print out and mail that return. But in my case, I'm just going to use let's pretend that we have a social security number. We'll click on OK. And then the tax return will open. Now, in my case, I'm using the traditional forms method of preparing the return. So that means that when I open a return, it takes me to this client data screen where I capture all the basic taxpayer information, the spouse info, the address, a whole bunch of basic information that will then transfer to all the forms that you add to the tax return. And if we look over here to the left, under attached forms, we can see under this general area some different, I guess these are CrossLink related forms and tools and options, whether it's this client data form that we're looking at here, or the invoice for the tax return when it comes to how much the customer is going to pay, or capturing signatures, keeping track of remote signature requests, really, through this remote signature area, or even a depreciation area where you can go to add assets that you're going to depreciate for this return. We'll take a look at some of these options here in a bit, but I just wanted to point out some of the tools that you have over here. And then right below that, you have your federal section. This is where you can see all the federal forms currently attached to this return. It starts off typically with a 1040 and a Form 8879 in order to e-file. In my case, I also set up the software to add schedules 1, 2, and 3 automatically. Sometimes there are some forms you can do that where you can add them to the tax return just when you start it off. And then as we work with this return, you'll notice that over here to the left, forms will add themselves automatically depending on what information I'm typing in. And also any form that I add manually to the tax return, of course, would populate over here as well. You'll see it listed, including any states too. If you do state returns, you'll see the state package here with all the state forms below it. Now, before we go into filling out information, quickly, I want to point out the toolbar up top. Here we have plenty of options, as you can see, options that may be, or tools that may be useful as you work with the tax return. The biggest ones, probably print, verify, and queue, lined up right next to one another and kind of like around the middle. We're definitely going to be covering each one of those tools. But there are other ones here, whether it's chatting with technical support or registering a payment being made from the customer. Plenty of other options here that may be useful as you work with a tax return. But for now, let's start with this one customer that we're dealing with. We're going to enter in some information for this client data, starting with the date of birth. Just type something in here. Their name and their last name, their occupation. A lot of this is pretty straightforward, right? Phone number, cell. Now here, I'll pause real quick because I do want to mention that some tools, some options when you're working with the software rely on some fields being filled out, like the cell phone field or the email field, right? If you're trying to send a text message or an email through the software to this customer, then in that case, you have to, fill out that information here, their email and their cell phone, in order to kind of like use those text messaging or email related tools. Along with the cell phone number, you also have to mark this little box here. Kind of hard to, sometimes maybe easy to miss, but there is a little box here that says text message. And down below in this gray area is useful because it tells you what exactly is expected of that field, what kind of information you should be typing in, or what you should do with this particular field that you're on. In this case, it says check box if customer agrees to receive text messages. So that's what we're doing here. We're just marking the box, assuming that the customer, the taxpayer, is okay, right, getting text messages. Here we have this little prompt just reminding you about the terms and conditions, the small print, standard text messaging rates apply, that kind of deal. And then once we mark that with the next, also important is the cell phone carrier. Sometimes it is required, especially when it comes to capturing signatures remotely. You want to make sure that you capture the cell phone carrier for the customer. So depending on what cell phone carrier they use, you can just pick it from this list. You could also begin to type it in. This field, as you type in, it'll want to guess what you're typing in. And then this field and other fields like it, it depends on what field you're on. But this one is tied to a database. It's tied to this choices list. So if you see this choices button at the bottom, illuminate, that means that you have a list of choices that you can choose from. You click on the button and it shows you this list of all the potential options that can apply. So keep an eye out for that. Those fields, this bottom section is going to be very useful when you're working with a return, because not only does it tell you what you should be typing in that field, but it also provides these little buttons to the left, choices, worksheets, form links, that may be useful as you're processing the return. We'll take a look at some of these other buttons as we go through this return here. But we filled out some basic taxpayer information Let's also enter in their ID. Technically, this is optional, but it may process the tax return faster. Let's say it was issued in 22 and expires in 2026. The filing status. This is another one where at first glance, you may not know, what you should be typing in here, but down below it tells you 1 for single, 2 for married filing jointly, and so on. For this example, we'll choose head of household just to deal with, entering in dependents. Since I chose head of household, it skipped all the spouse's information, but depending on the return, you may need to fill this out if it's a married filing jointly return. Here we have the address information. It took me straight to the line for the US address. I'll type something in here along with the zip code to fill that all out. We also have some information here regarding military service. If they were involved in some sort of military conflict, you can report on that information here. You have a choices list, just like we saw with the text messaging, with all those available options in there. We also have the bank account information. If the customer wants to do a direct deposit or a direct debit, this is another one where we have choices, as you can see. Here, you can pick from a list if you've entered that bank previously, or you can, start typing in a new one. It really depends on if you have that bank into your system. If not, the next time, once you save this return, the next time you try to enter in a bank for another customer, that bank will be added to the database. Account number, I'll just type something in here real quick. You do have to confirm it just to make, there you go. Just to make sure that you've entered the bank account correctly. It asks that you enter it twice, and what kind of account it is, checking, savings, so on. We have this area where you can capture how the customer heard of your business if you'd like to keep track of that information. There's even a report that you can run later on that kind of breaks down this information, tells you how many customers were brought in using, whatever method you have here, whatever method you've added into the database. Now, by default, some of these choices databases, they may not contain information. Some of them, like the bank I was mentioning, every time you enter a new bank, a new EIN for the W-2, there's some other ones, they add themselves to the database automatically. This one, the client referral one, this one relies on a list that was built already. So if you're looking to modify this list of choices, if you want to add more referral options manually, you could always go into the database all the way to the top left. These are essentially these are the choices options, whether it's the bank, here's the bank routing numbers, or the EINs, that's employers and payers. There's one, I think, that we passed, occupations. That's another one that's up here by the customer's information. Occupation, I just put worker. But if you want to build that list of choices like yourself, add things manually, you can go up to database and modify that. But moving on, client referral typically is optional, so I'll just leave it blank. Speaking of optional, for those customers that purchase their health insurance through the marketplace, those are the customers that you would have to come in here and select that, yes, they purchased their health insurance through the marketplace, and you would mark it with a little X. You can select on this box, on this button here, that'll take you to the ACA questionnaire that you can fill out using the customer's 1095-A that they received in the mail. Now, this is only if they purchase their health insurance through the marketplace. If they have their health insurance through their employer, through private insurance, in that case, we don't have to worry about reporting that. It's only for those taxpayers that purchased through the marketplace. And then finally, dependents. This is where we can enter in our children, our dependents technically. And then let's say they were born in 2014, that works. Social. Relationship, here's another one where I can start to type in whether they're a son, daughter, or I can take a look at my choices list. This one comes pre-built with all the available options. And then here we have this other field, the next field that it took me to, that says MO. Again, this is another field where at first glance, you may not know what to fill in here, but down below it tells you number of months dependent live with the taxpayer. CN. You could also type in CN if they were a Canadian resident, or MX for Mexico. In my case, if they lived the whole year with the taxpayer, you can type in 12. By the way, on this field, I see that we have a worksheets button that has become illuminated. Sometimes you need to go into these worksheets, and worksheets are basically like an expanded version of the area that we're in. We're looking at the worksheet associated with this field. And as you can see, with this one in particular, the dependent one, it has the same fields overall that we have behind it, right? It's got the same stuff, but with some additional ones. Date of death. This one is a state ID code. This is like if it involves the taxpayer spouse, or even the IP PIN. If the dependent has an identity protection PIN, then in that case, you can come in here and fill that out. They're a bit rare, but sometimes it happens. But there you go. So worksheets, think of it as like an expanded area, the expanded worksheet where you're dealing with more detailed information about the area that you're in, about the field or section that you're in of the return. But for now, I'll just say yes. The 12 months with the dependent, or excuse me, the dependent lived 12 months with the taxpayer. And then we have these other codes that were filled out automatically, having to do with the eligibility of the EIC, the child tax credit. It's already assumed, the program is assuming based off the social here, the date, the relationship, the time spent with the living with the taxpayer, that these codes apply. However, you can modify them. So if, for example, it says eligible, but if you want to choose some other option, S for student, D for disabled, depending on the situation, right, of the dependent, then you can do so. But for now, a pretty basic information here. We have the taxpayer's information. It's going to be a married filing jointly, so no spouse, address, bank account, and dependent. Now, everything that we've entered in here will start transferring over into the forms that we've added to the tax return. And notice over here, if we look over to the forms again, now I have an 8867 that was added to the tax return automatically without really me even doing anything. And that's because we have a dependent now, and we have some more filled out information. As you fill out information in the program, it'll start adding those forms that we know are required. You don't have to add everything manually. Now, something that you probably have to add manually is the income form, the income source forms. So if you go to add a form, all the way over here on the top left, we can see a list of all the federal forms we can possibly start adding to this tax return. W-2, most commonly added one, right? I would say that's the one that's automatically highlighted, but you can go through this list and add things. You can scroll through this list. At first, it starts kind of like by importance, I would say, and then it goes into numerical, alphabetical order. You can see this same list of forms by clicking on index up top, and it'll organize itself by the description of the form instead, as opposed to like the form number or name. So using the description. And you can also search down below. If you're searching for a specific term like Social Security, you can start typing that in. Very useful for the forms if you're looking for a 1099 of some sort. Just start typing it in. It'll kind of lead you to that area. States are also available here as well. There's the state tab up top where you can choose which state you want to add. Let's say California, and then what state form for California you want to add. If it's a regular, like a resident tax return for California, most likely the 540. In this case, notice what's happening here in the new software. The state package is not released yet. You can add the state. It's going to pop in there. There it is. But as you can see here, it's not released. These state packages, they come a little bit later on throughout the season. So another important aspect of transmitting with the software, transmissions, or excuse me, state packages are received when you transmit with the program. So another type of update. I saw that I had some state updates to apply when we did that earlier. But moving forward, I'm going to delete this state for now, just to keep this tax return on a federal level. To do that, you can right-click on any one of these forms or state packages that you want to delete, and then click on Remove State. There we go. Now we're just with the federal. Okay, so let's add a W-2 to this tax return. Let's say they just have some income from their employer. The EIN is another one of these choices lists that I can choose from, or I can just start typing it in. It'll autofill the information. This is another one that saves behind the scenes. So every time you enter a new EIN, a new address information for the employer, it saves it to the database automatically. And then here, wages, let's say, I don't know, let's say $35K, $6,000 for withholding, just to enter something in here. As you can see, by entering in fields 1 and 2 for wages and withholding, the rest, 3, 4, 5, 6, they all fill out automatically. If you need to make any adjustments, you can do that by using these kind of like lighter blue fields right below it. You'll notice when you use CrossLink that there's these gray fields and then there's the light blue ones. The gray fields are locked fields in a sense. They're typically showing you the like auto-calculated information. You're not technically supposed to be going in here and like typing over gray fields. You can do that, especially in special circumstances, but I would say it's overall pretty rare. If you type over these gray fields, it'll show up as an override, which still it allows you to e-file the return, but just in case. The blue fields, those ones do allow direct entry. And in the case of these ones that we see here, like if you wanted to make a change, let's say put 34,000 for the Social Security wages, just type in that blue field and notice that it'll kind of like change it or update the field above. All right? Just a question that may occur. Usually these calculations are on, perfect, but in some instances they may be slightly different, and you typically want to report, whatever's on the paper document, that's what you want here as well. And especially when it comes to these other fields, right? Lines 13, 12, depending on whether the taxpayer has retirement options, that'll be on the paper W-2. You just want to match field for field. And then the state information as well. This is another one where they may have state income, state taxes. So if that's the case, you fill that out. In my case, in Washington State and other certain states, we don't have to worry about that. So no state income there. But now, let's say, if it's a basic W-2 with no retirement or anything, that's pretty much good. If I refresh my program here, it'll recalculate everything that I've entered so far. This is like a manual refresh, or recalculation of the return. If I go to another form as well, like if I go to the client data, if I return there, or if I move away from this form, it'll auto-calculate as well. But I'll just do it to see it on screen while I have the W-2 on screen. I'm going to click on refresh, and now big changes to the tax return. By entering in some wages, now it's added like the EIC earned income credit checklist. It's added I think the 8812 the 8812 was added based off of the income. We had the dependent before, but now we have income as well. So now those two together start adding some credits and some things automatically. And assuming that you had other income, keep on going in here, add form, add all the income source forms that you need. And then once you think you're done with the tax return, you can see here what the refund amount is going to be based off what information we've entered so far. Looks like I have a $7,000 tax return. But we do want to take a look at some other areas as well, because this may change if there's any missing information in the return. As we complete that information, it'll readjust the refund. So let's take care of that. Actually, before we get into the verify process to see if there's anything missing, let's take a look at the 8879. This is an important field, or important form, excuse me. because it allows you to determine how the taxpayer is going to get their refund. There's at the very top, refund type. This is where you get to choose that, whether it's going to be a check from the IRS, a check mailed from the IRS, a direct deposit from the IRS. Now, if it's option 1 and 2, that means that there is no bank product involved. The taxpayer is not going to be paying your tax preparation fees through their refund. Instead, they're paying you directly, right? So just keep that in mind. Now, if it is a bank product, option 5 is the option that you'll want to select. If you select option 5 and you're approved for bank products, the bank app form will populate automatically over here to the federal forms. You'll see bank app pop in. And that's where you can finalize the bank product process, whether they want a direct deposit of the bank product, whether they want an advance, or at this point, since we're a little bit early in the season, the IRS isn't open yet, if they want a pre-act advance, a pre-acknowledged advance. Those are all handled using that bank app form. I'm sorry I can't demonstrate it for you. I just don't have a real EFIN with bank approval. But just keep that in mind. If you are approved, that bank app form will populate or will add itself automatically as soon as you select option 5 here. And then also related to how you're getting paid, right? If you're using a bank product, the benefit of that is the taxpayer is paying your tax prep fees using their refund. And then your tax prep fees are typically handled all through the invoice. Unless you disable the invoice, it's all handled through here. In my case, I've set up my software to automatically charge based off what forms are being used, to charge, in my case, $150 for the 1040, $100 for the W-2. I have both of those, so it's automatically charging that to the customer. And then this is something you can do as well. If you want to set up the software under Setup and Billing Setup, you can do that to modify how much each form costs, Or some other preparers, they just go in here and manually type in what the customer owes. You can type in under this, at the very top of the invoice, right? Description, fees related to tax preparation services. Here, you can type in that my tax prep is going to cost $200, let's say. And there you go. It'll add itself to the cost of the return. Or if you don't have any fees, that'll be the price for the tax return. Same thing applies with discounts down below. Here's this discount area where I can say that we have a family discount of, that's $50. There you go. And it's all automatically, adjusting the total amount that appears at the very bottom. Or actually here, total due, 404. So that's the invoice. Again, depending on what you want to do, you can set it up to automatically charge customers, or you can just manually for each one deal with those invoices or deal with those tax preparation fees. So now that we've got that, I'm under the impression that this return is looking pretty good. We have a $7,000 refund. I think I've completed everything that I need to complete. However, there is something you can do to make sure, and that's the verify process. When you click on this verify button on the toolbar, it'll open up this pop-up that shows you all the things that may be missing, that may be wrong or incorrect. You have some different types of errors here. As you can see, there's warnings and fatal errors. Warnings being things that, typically you fill this out, but we don't necessarily prevent you from completing the return because it's missing. You can still e-file as an example, or still print the return if it has a warning. That is a setting in the software, but typically, by default, you can print if it has a warning. And then fatal errors, that's a bit more severe. That means that you can't really print or transmit until you fix that. So let's go through some of these here, starting at the top, client data. Okay, so here it's taking me automatically. When you double click on one of these errors that you have to fix, it takes you to the field that you need to go to make the correction. Here, where is this? The information and status page. It took me to this field all the way at the bottom saying that I have to sign the 8879, kind of like a advisory option. So I'm going to mark that yes. I'm going to sign the 8879, even though I haven't done that yet. But I will be doing that. And then that cleared out that error. I've taken care of it. I can move on to the next one. This one here, a fatal error, it's because I don't have bank approval. So I'm going to just change this to a check. Actually, let's do a direct deposit since I entered the bank account information. The program is warning me I'm going to remove the bank application. That means that I have to collect my fees directly from the customer. Just a message, a reminder. That's okay. Yes. And then back to verify. Let's see what we have next. Client data. Oh, this is a field, a little field over here to the right next to the driver's license information, a little bit maybe easy to miss. And if you don't know what this field means, again, keep in mind down below, it's going to tell you D for driver's license, S for state, and so on. Let's do a D for driver's license. That's what I typed in. But depending on the customer, that may change. This has to do with the remote sign. My program is set to use remote sign. Yours may be activated as well if you want to use this functionality. If that's the case, it asks you typically at the very bottom of the client data screen, do you want to, or does the taxpayer consent to receive to sign their documentation remotely? Depending on what you're going to do, if you are going to use remote sign for this customer, you can choose Y for yes. If you are not going to be using that, you can choose N for no. And that way you won't be, using the remote sign for this customer. If you are going to be using remote sign, you also have the ability to include the remote signature charge on the invoice. If you've set up the software to automatically charge the taxpayer extra if you're doing remote sign for the customer, then it's your choice whether or not you want to add that extra charge to it, or maybe this is a special customer, you don't want to charge them that little extra amount. You can choose no here as well. So depending on whatever the case may be. Verify again. We've got a whole bunch of errors here, as you can see, but don't worry, we're going to go through these fairly quickly, just pointing out some of the ones that you most likely encounter as you use the software. This one has to do with cryptocurrency. If they were using or dealing with cryptocurrency, if they had cryptocurrency, the IRS is asking that we report that information. If it's a no, mark it with an X. Yes, straightforward. Next up, EIC checklist. And I can see here that we're really going to be focusing on some dependent stuff now. EIC checklist and a whole bunch of 8867. So let's do that. Double clicking on that first one, it took me to what? It took me to this EIC checklist where I have some stuff that's missing. All I have to do is mark it with an X. Naturally, you want to verify that this information is correct with the customer. This is all about making sure that these credits really apply to the taxpayer. So the IRS is asking that we fill this out as complete and as accurately as possible. But if the program will take you to the yes or no, if you're using the verify, it'll take you to the yes or no that will give you the credit. It's like showing you what the answer should be. But naturally, you want to check or confirm with the taxpayer. This is another example. This what is it, the 8867? Yeah. It's taking you to each question. I think this has a change for this upcoming season, but the verify will definitely help you complete this. Again, for the sake of time, I'm kind of just letting the verify complete this for me, but these are all questions that you want to verify with the customer. But it's pretty easy, as you can see, to go through this process. This one, line 5, it took me to line B as the default one, but this one certainly can be something else, depending on the situation. I think it took us to the most commonly used one, but you certainly want to select which one is appropriate. Same thing for this head of household one. It took me to this line I, but you can choose whichever one is appropriate for the taxpayer. And now I think we're at a better spot. If I click on verify, this is overall what you want to see. We don't have any errors. We're ready to print and transmit the tax return. So let's go right to it. We're all done with this return. We have a $7,000 refund for this customer with that one dependent, one taxpayer, one W-2. Pretty straightforward. If we click on print here, it'll allow us to print this tax return, print the final version of the tax return. If I click on print, off it'll go to my printer, or I guess to whatever printer I have selected here. You can swap this over if you'd like. Usually it just uses the default printer, whatever you set as the default printer for your computer. But along with printing, or I guess before printing, I do have some other options here if I wanted to use them, like the ability to sign doc, meaning signing with your mouse, touchscreen, signature pad. If the customer is right in front of you and they want to sign for this return electronically, that's what this sign doc button is all about. We also have the remote sign option. That's that, when the customer is signing remotely, they're not in the office, they need to sign via text or email. That's what this remote sign button is all about. You have a queue return for batch printing. You're probably not going to be using that. That's if you want to print the return later on. You may want to filter if you're trying to print a specific set of forms. You can come in here and do so. But in most cases, the default is just fine. You can create a PDF of the return as well. If you want to see the PDF on screen or see a preview of the return, you can do that. And then email, if you want to email a copy of the tax return to the taxpayer, this requires a little bit of setup with like a Gmail account. You have to typically set something in the software, set something in Gmail to have the software communicate with your Gmail address, but it is an option. And if you need some help with that, certainly technical support can help you. But once it's set up, you're good. And typically, if you're coming from the prior year and it's been set up in the prior year, you're usually good at this point too with the new program. So let's just sign. I'll do the regular sign doc, accept. And then now the tax return is going to populate, or it's going to show on screen with all the signatures in place, including my paid preparer signature, my ERO signature. Those are all things that I entered previously in the program. I saved them into that database, the database that we saw before. But now we're good. Now we printed the return. In my case, I'm more of a paperless office, so I'm not really sending anything to the printer. But if I check my document archive, there's that copy of the return that I've printed, so to speak. And then I could always come back in here and take a look at this. If I need to, I can print it directly from here, printing a PDF, pretty easy. But otherwise, I'll just leave it in there, the document archive. This is my filing cabinet for the customer. And I could even, I can click on this import button in the document archive. Let me show you this again. I think I may have gone too quickly for that one. Right now we're in the document archive over here to the left. This is where anything that you've printed will be stored. If you're using the TaxPass app website, anything that the customer may have sent to you will be here in the document archive. And then also anything that you want to import, if there's any pictures or documents, IDs, PDFs, anything that you want to attach and kind of have associated with this customer, you can use this document archive for that. No additional charge. It's all built in. So now that we have the return kind of printed, verified, everything is good, it's the final step, queuing the return and getting it e-filed, getting it ready to be, received by the IRS. To do that, I'm going to click on this queue button. This queue button is all about getting the return ready to be e-filed and transmitted. I'll click on queue. Here's the federal package that's being ready to be e-filed. If I had any states, they'd show up here as well. And then all you have to do is click on queue here on the very bottom right. It'll close the return, and now we're ready to be, it's ready to be e-filed. The tax return, the status, says return queued, meaning that the return is just sitting here waiting for your next transmission. It's also been locked. It might be hard to see, but we have this little lock icon. And if you open the return, it'll tell you tax return is locked. Any changes may be lost. And that's because the program, it's locking the return because technically speaking, this should be the final version of the return. This is the return that was printed, that was queued, that's being sent to the IRS. You don't want to have a copy sent to the IRS and have a different copy in your system. Now, in some cases, you may need to make an adjustment. You may need to make a correction or something. That's fine. You could always open the return. Right now it's locked. There's this lock icon over here to the right again. And if I try to make changes, it doesn't allow me. But you can go up to the return menu, and then there's a lock, unlock option right here. It's like a toggle switch. Lock it or unlock it. But I'm going to say that this return is just fine. I just wanted to show you that lock option because, sometimes you may need to make corrections. And now this return is sitting here in my transmission window, or my transmission queue is what we call it. If I wanted to, I can start a new return and just keep working on the next customer, right? Or if I just wanted to send this return right now, I can transmit. If I click on transmit and then click on that filter button that we saw before, now we have that customer waiting here. This customer and any other customer that may be in that return queued status. So you can send multiple returns at the same time if need be, or you can do them one at a time. So if I click OK here and transmit, that's when the return will be sent off. Right now, the IRS has not opened yet. The IRS is the e-filing system is not available. However, you can technically transmit the returns, and they'll just sit here in our central site, waiting until the IRS opens their gates. As soon as the IRS opens, we'll send any returns that you've sent to us. Or you can wait as well. You can leave them in your queue. If you need to transmit without sending returns, like maybe you want to get some updates, but you don't want to send any of these returns, you can unselect them all. Unselect them all. There's an unselect button here. That will temporarily unselect them so that when you transmit, you're not sending anything. But if you come back into transmit, they'll be selected again. It's always going to be there until you remove it. Remove is more permanent. Unselect is just for this transmission. So in that case, let me go back into the PowerPoint real quick just to wrap up here and review what we covered today. We just saw the basic preparation of a tax return, W-2, adding forms, things like that. The tools that are available to you to prepare the return, things like remote sign, document archive, or your regular electronic signature method. And then verification and transmission of a return. Very important when we're wrapping up that tax return, the verify process, and then the queue or transmit process.